All right, folks, gather around. Thank you for coming back. I hope you enjoyed the room in the last 10 minutes you spent there. But we are now ready to transition to our next room, which focuses on Sarah. And many folks who have visited this museum have wondered, why is Sarah in the Hall of Faith? I would say it's a fair question. At least when you buttress her to Abraham and some of the others, you wonder, did she really exemplify faith? We're going to look at the whole story of Sarah. We're going to dive deep. We're going to focus obviously on the things that were called out in Hebrews 11, but I wanted to touch on another aspect of Sarah's faith before we get started into that discussion. But first of all, as we have in every room, we have our inscription on the east wall. My left, your right, it is from Hebrews 11, verses 11 and 12. Would one of you be so kind as to read that inscription for this room? Somebody show me with your hand in the air, so our microphone. All right, we've got the lady in red. I think her name is Sharon, if I recalled from our last room.
By faith, Sarah herself received power to conceive, even when she was past the age, since she considered him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born descendants, as many as the stars of heaven, and as many as the innumerable grains of sand by the seashore.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Sharon. So that was the discussion, the main highlight that the Hebrews 11 author focused on for Sarah. Again, there's other issues of faith that I think she demonstrates, and we're going to talk about those. But first, I want you to focus your attention on the larger-than-life-size sculpture of Sarah over here, my right, your left. What are some things you notice in this sculpture as it relates to Sarah? How is the sculptor depicting her? Any thoughts, observations? What I hear? Old, okay.
Old and laughing.
Old and laughing. Excellent. Very good. You guys are very perceptive. Any other observations you see of Sarah here in this sculpture? Yes?
She's very suntanned.
Very suntanned. Okay. I like it. It's amazing you can pick that up in a bronze sculpture, but okay, good for you. The color mix did show that, very, very keen. One of the things that I noticed, in addition to those wonderful observations, is her stunning beauty. And we're going to get to that. But you may have noticed else something a little bit, about midriff. You notice that she's pregnant. This sculpture is called nonagenarian, which means 90-year-old. And this is really the picture of Sarah that this room is attempting to amplify. And if you've noticed throughout the room, just kind of its general vibe, it's sort of a party feel. This is we in the staff call this the baby shower room, but really it's about Sarah, and it's about Sarah, this lovely lady who happens to be quite pregnant despite the fact that she's old, and she's in fact 90 years old. So let's get into that. Actually, no, we're going to table that for a second. That's the main focus. But I did want to spend a few minutes talking about another aspect of Sarah's faith. We touched on it a bit about 40 minutes ago when we were in Abraham's room, but I feel it's worth a little more exploration. Can somebody quickly remind us of what we discussed, primarily the faith issues in the last room? We literally just left it 10 minutes ago. Should be like fresh on your mind. What was the main thing about Abraham that we discussed? Okay, good. He obeyed and went. And we talked about the call for Abram to obey and go. If he were to do that, obey and go, it wasn't just him. It was him and Sarah. It was him and Sarah and the servants and animals and kind of the whole entourage, the whole enterprise. God bless you. And we talked last hour about how Sarah as the wife, maybe her ability to veto or to sort of derail Abraham's plans were not what wives might have the power to do today, just given that culture. I still want to give Sarah a lot of credit for faith in that episode. And I think it's worthy to kind of pause on that for a minute. Because that episode was when God spoke to Abraham, to Abram. So he was still Abram at the time. There's no indication from the passage that communication from God to Abram was also perceived by Sarah. The passage seems pretty clear that God spoke one-on-one. It was a direct communication to Abram. It wasn't a voice that was audible to others, or if there was no indication Sarah's there. It's a direct message from God to Abram. Go to the place I will show you. Abram, we committed him last week, as our room did, that he went. He obeyed, and Sarah went with him. But if we think about that episode from Sarah's perspective, imagine yourself, I'm going to try to set the stage for how this may have been presented to Sarah. Admittedly, this is a bit speculative, maybe some creative license. Sarah's up in the morning, she's kind of getting breakfast ready, she's scrambling the eggs and get the hash browns going, and Abram walks in and says, honey, you will not believe it. God told me that this is our last breakfast here. We're gonna go. And you're Sarah, imagine, it's something along those lines. You're Sarah and your husband tells you, God spoke this word to me and we're gonna do it. Think about what Sarah might have processed in her mind as Abram shares this with her. And I will welcome your thoughts. Imagine what things she might have thought when Abram comes and presents this news to her. Let's hear some thoughts that she might have had. Okay. Where are we going? Okay, yeah, some of the same questions that Abram raised. Well, where? Yes, sir.
Are you sure it was God?
Are you sure it was God? We're gonna camp on that one. Very good. Do I get to go? Okay, interesting. Can I come as opposed to I don't want to go? Maybe she thought that. Maybe she thought I don't want to go. Other thoughts?
Drinking too much ceremonial wine?
All right, Abram, you gotta start off with orange juice, not whatever you had. Okay, good. Let's focus on what Lee mentioned here a moment ago. Are you sure it was God? Again, she didn't have the benefit of having this direct communication, so she is hearing secondhand. Abram, God talked to me and he said, we're doing this. Sarah, are you sure? Are you sure one? Are you sure it's God? And that's a legit question. And again, we in this Hall of Faith Museum, we want to inspire faith. We want to inspire faith to be action-based. That's the whole point of this museum. That's our focus. But we don't want you to act foolishly in faith. We want you to be confident that God is the one communicating, putting this opportunity in front of you. And when you have that sense, when you have that realization, hopefully then you'll have a second confidence of doing whatever it may be. In last room's instance, go. So I would encourage you, as his question on behalf of Sarah was, you should start there. Is this God? As opposed to who else? Who else might be communicating to someone an idea like get up and go? Kind of think binary. If it's not God, it could be the devil. Could be the devil. Could be someone else masquerading as an angel of light saying, oh, I want you to go do this. And it sounds like God, looks like God, it's not God. Could be yourself. Could be your own initiative. Crazy idea. Maybe you've had an ambition and now you feel like it's time to strike out and do this thing that's really more about you versus God. So fundamentally, do your best, and we've talked, I think, already a bit about how one can discern whether God is the one communicating or not. Did you have an additional thought?
Well, it also could be a circumstance. The land's drying up here. We need to move all of this somewhere we got water.
Okay. Yeah. So let's pause for just a second. This is not going to be nearly as thorough as it could be and maybe should be for purposes of this learning, but what are some ways that what are some tools one can use to evaluate, is this God? One of them is circumstances. Maybe the landscape, so to speak, literal or figurative, is consistent with God communicating something. There's a famine, we gotta go. Or an opportunity, the door's closing and I can't seem to control that. Maybe God is closing this door or opening another door. Another tool, hopefully you're pretty mindful of, is this. I have a paper one. Most of you have paper. Some of you have digital versions. God's Word. God spoke to us, still does, through preserved Word. You might say, well, how can looking up Deuteronomy or Matthew let me know if this job promotion is God or not? All right, it's a fair question. But you can learn about God in His Word, and you can know God's nature in His Word, and you can know what He wants of mankind in His nature, and that can be one of the filters, one of the tools we use to evaluate, is this a communication from God or not? Another would be peace, a sense of peace. And I'm using the word peace specifically as it relates to the fruit of the Spirit, because peace is a state of spirit as opposed to an emotional state. One can have a spiritual peace while at the same time being very nervous about a leap of faith. God says, go, pick up and go. I sense this is God. I can feel in the midst of this, what seems like a chaotic moment and a very intimidating moment. I feel God is speaking this, even though my emotions are running amok and I would rather not do this because this is really scary and I don't know what's next. I'm not sure where I'm going or how long it's going to take, the things we talked about an hour ago. But finding God's peace in the midst of a scary moment can be a good tool to assess whether or not this is God. Seeking counsel from others, sharing this, I think God told me this, would you help me work through this issue? Would you help me evaluate, could this be God? What are your thoughts? Just kind of getting some feedback from folks. Ideally, if you're looking for spiritual discernment, you want to speak to somebody who shares your faith and knows Christ personally and can perhaps be a voice God uses to speak a word of confirmation to you or a word of correction to you. This is not God at all. I get the sense it's not, whatever. So there's lots of tools, and again, that would be a whole much more time than we have to devote to it. But there's tools, and you should use. Last word I would say is use multiple tools. Don't go to your favorite tool every time this thing is the case. It's not always circumstances. It's not going to always be the indicator that it's God. It's not always peace. It's not always. So if you can find in your toolbox multiple tools that'll help you discern is this God communicating or not, that's a safer way to go about this. And then we just took a rabbit trail. So back to the point. One of Sarah's questions might have been, are you sure this was God? That's a fair question. Second question she might have is, honey, are you sure you heard him correctly? It was God, but are you sure you got the message right? Are you sure that we're really supposed to do this? We're supposed to do it now versus in a year or two? Chris?
Well, sir, that would be the reason possibly for the passage in Genesis chapter 12, verse 7, which says, then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him.
Okay.
So while this is an interesting exercise, we do see that later the Lord actually did appear to Abram
Yes.
in person, perhaps to validate
Good.
his own human frailty, wondering, to validate and assuage the information given to Sarah, given to Lot, possibly, to validate and to solidify his believing loyalty.
Okay. No, great points, great points. And that episode, again, though, is him appearing to Abram. And so we're focusing, I think you're right, and I think God, he clearly did that. And did he appear in a visible sense to encourage Abram, you're on the right path, it really is me, trust me, keep doing this, was there other motives? I don't know. I think it could very well be like you described, that God was, maybe Abram was feeling a little weaker, and so God felt I need to give him another boost, and maybe doing it visibly as opposed to just audibly will help him in having more believing loyalty and having more courage to move forward. Excellent points, and God has done that, throughout Scripture. Focusing on Sarah, though, as we look at the faith of this woman here, this beautiful nonagenarian pregnant lady, one of her questions is, again, is it really God that spoke to you, honey? And if so, are you following correctly what he told you? Did you hear correctly? Did you process correctly? There are probably other questions, but as I thought about Sarah as it relates to the room we were just left an hour ago, yes, maybe she kind of had to tag along because in that culture she didn't really have the ability to say, I'm not going, God hasn't spoken to me. I would give her credit, though, for saying that she complied because she had equal, if not bigger faith than Abram, because she not only trusted God, but she trusted that her husband actually heard from God and actually is doing correctly what God had given her. So I see her as kind of having two different faith chains going on. Abram's faith was obviously tremendous. God said go and do, and he did. Sarah's hearing that same thing secondhand and trusting God said go and do, and trusting her husband's correct in that account, correct in that report, and willing to follow Abram, willing to put faith both in God and in Abram to uproot and go to who knows where and however long it takes, and what are we going to encounter, all the questions we talked about an hour ago in the last room, and I saw a hand back there. Mitch.
And I agree with everything you said because she called Abraham Lord in their relationship. So that lends it to me. If he said go, she said, okay.
As an act of faith rather than as a societal norm where she's just going to do what husband does. I think so. Because, I mean, she could have been difficult about it. Maybe she goes begrudgingly and she's like Job's wife, you know, curse God and die. I mean, she could have been that kind of person. We don't get a sense of any of that in this narrative. So again, we're admittedly speculating a bit on that episode. That's not the focus of our inscription here, but I felt like Sarah needs a little credit for enabling Abram's faith, because I think she was a compliant, cooperative, supportive, encouraging spouse, not a protesting one, not one who would like to veto if only I had the societal power to do it, not the things that could have gotten in the way, made that challenging. So I give her a shout out for that, and I think that's an appropriate thing to do. All right, but let's get back to the focus that we have in this room here and what we're seeing in this picture in our baby shower room here. Go back to Hebrews 11:11. I'll read it from the translation I have. By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was barren, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. All right, so now we're going to go back and look at some of the backstory to that passage. So if you would go to Genesis 12, we're going to be a few verses ahead of where Chris just was a moment ago, but we're going to Genesis 12. We're going to do a little bit of math. We're going to do a little bit of kind of seeing what led up to this commendation we see in this room and in Hebrews 11. All right, so this passage in Genesis 12, we're going to be reading from 11 through 16. To set the stage, Abram, as we, again, we focused on much of this last room, where Abram was called and went, and then we snipped it, did a little bit of moving forward, but Abram and his crew encounter a famine when they land. They're living in tents, and part of the issue is there's now a famine. They go to Egypt. So they do go to Egypt, and we're going to pick up and read a little bit about what happens there, verses 11 through 16. Can I get one volunteer to read that medium-long passage? Show me by hand who you are so we can get our microphone. Gary, thank you. Gary, hang on one second. Let us all get there. Again, Genesis 12, 11 through 16. Go ahead, sir.
As he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarah, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you. When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw Sarah. It was a very beautiful woman. When the Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken to his palace. He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels.
All right, thank you, sir. So Sarah's a striking lady, as the sculptor attempted to depict here in this story. How old is Sarah at the time? You might want to ask that question. Well, a couple verses before, we saw, again, in the last room, that Abram was 75 when he was told to leave. We also were told that he is 10 years older than Sarah, and let me find where that says that. I have it somewhere. I'm just not jumping out at take my word for it. It's there, and I'll find the verse for it. But he's 10 years younger, so she's 65 when they left. At some point after they left and they landed, there was this famine. They went to Egypt, so we don't know exactly how old she is. We know she's older than 65. And apparently she's stunning. To the point that why did Abram say this? Abram was concerned that if the Egyptians saw the stunning woman and wanted her, and she was married, the fix for that, verse 4? All right, Sharon was indicating verse 4.
Well, it says Abram was 75.
Yeah, I knew that. I know somewhere it talks about her, and I think later on when we get to her, yeah, thank you. She's 10 years younger.
127, so 60s would be like...
Middle age? Okay. Perhaps.
She'd just be middle-aged.
Perhaps, okay. Whatever she is, she's stunning. And Abram was concerned that if they think I'm her husband and they want her, then the solution is to kill me. If they think I'm her brother, they just take her and I'm not killed. That's basically the mindset. And so that's the plan. They come in there, and he's afraid for his life because she's such a beauty. And he says, I'm your brother, not your husband. Go along with it. She does. She's spared. In fact, she goes into Pharaoh's house. We're not exactly told what that entails, but likely it involves, things that a husband and wife or a ruler and a harem might do. But she complies. Again, what makes you wonder, is she really worthy of being in this museum? And then this episode repeats itself, essentially, in Genesis chapter 20. And we'll get back to the comment that our jokester Mix likes to raise every now and then. I'll read verses 1 through 2 of Genesis chapter 20. From there, Abraham traveled to the region of the Negev. We inquired about what that was. I think we came to the fact that that was a desert region, and settled there between Kadesh and Shur. While he lived in Gahar, Abram said about his wife Sarah, she is my sister. So Abimelech of Gerar had Sarah brought to him, blah, blah, blah. So the same kind of deal. We're now, the history repeats itself. How far down the road does history repeat itself? Well, back in chapter 17, verse 1, we know that Abraham is 99 at this point. So assuming Genesis is written in chronological order, and there's no reason to think otherwise, chapter 20 is going to have been written and depict times after chapter 17, and in chapter 17, verse 1, Abram is 99. So we're now fast-forwarded 24 years. He's gotten 24 years older, so has Sarah. He is now in a different land. He has the same concern. You're my sister, not my wife, because you are still stunning. And now you're, to use the analogy of this gentleman back here, now maybe she's more in the 60s age frame as it relates to us, even though she's technically 89 years old, and he has the same point. So all that to say, she's a stunning woman. So much so that Abram had concerns for his own life, but the fact that she's so stunning as they go into foreign places and are relying on the resources of others during this time of famine. So you hopefully can see that a bit as you look at the sculpture here. They really wanted to, the sculptor really wanted us to see that and appreciate her beauty. What else, though? Let's go back to Genesis 15. Now, this is the main part of the story. So Genesis 15, that was, again, a little side step, side story, just to show you and emphasize the beauty that we see in Sarah. But in chapter 15 is where we get really to the heart of this room, the episode of this room. Can I get a different volunteer to read Genesis 15, verses 1 through 6? You would show me who you are by hand. Okay, Patrick has volunteered. Yes, sir. 15, 1 through 6.
After these things, the word of the Lord came unto Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am thy shield and thy exceeding great reward. And Abram said, Lord God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go childless, and the steward of my house is this Eliezer of Damascus? And Abram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my own house is mine heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came unto him, saying, This shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thine own bowels shall be thine heir. And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven, and tell the stars, if thou be able to number them. And said unto him, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness.
Very good. Thank you, sir. All right, so here we get a very important message. Again, God's communicating a lot to Abram. Last room was about God communicating to Abram, go and leave, and he did. Here we have a different communication. What's the essence of this communication that Patrick read? What's the main message from God? All right, yeah, you're going to have kids, or at least one kid. And Abram is distraught by that because at this point he doesn't have any. And even though lifespans were longer back then, as Mick pointed out, at this point he feels like it's probably, it's too late. I don't have kids. My wife doesn't have kids. We're now old enough, and he's lamenting the fact that under their system, if he dies without kids, his oldest servant's kid, or somebody other than his bloodline is going to inherit his estate. And he's saddened by that. And God comes and gives him a word of encouragement. So much so he's told to look up at the stars and see, so many will be your offspring. And Abram believed, and it was credited to him as righteousness. But if you know the story, you know that he and Sarah did not have success having a child even after this. Do any of you recall what they did to try to fix that issue, to try to address that issue. What do you recall? Yes. So after some time, well, first off, again, they haven't had children in a long time. He's well past 75, because he was 75 back in chapter 12. Now we're chapter 15. So he's somewhere between 75 and 99, because we know he's 99 at chapter 17. So he's old. And hadn't had kids yet, and feels like that's probably too late. And then God comes and says, you're going to have a child. Great news. So he and his wife, I presume, do their best to conceive without success. And because they have no success, the plan is, okay, maybe Sarah is not to be the birth mom. What Patrick read did not specifically say Sarah is to be the mother. It says you are to be the father, in all fairness, in all candor. At least that's what's preserved for us to read. So Sarah decides, let me offer my servant, my maidservant, to my husband, and she'll basically be my surrogate. Sarah's surrogate would be Hagar. We're going to have a child through Hagar, my servant girl, and then this will be my child, and the Lord will bless us through this child. So she proposes this to Abram. Abraham agrees to doing that. Now let's go to chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. Can I have a different reader? We're just going to kind of read the passage I just sort of summarized. I got a little ahead of myself. Somebody read from this half of the room. Somebody be a reader over here. Show me by hand. All right. Yes, ma'am.
Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abram agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian maidservant, Hagar, and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived.
All right, you can stop right there. In fact, I'll pause right there. All right, so that's the plan. They did what oftentimes we do. Things don't go as we anticipate. God gives us a direction. Maybe we've started in faith. Doesn't seem to be going as planned. They took matters in their own hands. That's kind of a cautionary tale here as we read this passage, as we think about Sarah and her rightful place here. We're going to get there eventually, I promise. But in the early goings, we have some issues, at least as it relates to this one. So she offers up somebody else. Hagar does conceive. Hagar does bear a son. Do we know the son's name? Anybody offhand? Ishmael, yes. And Ishmael is commonly viewed as the forefather of the Arab people. That's kind of how the sort of the worldview is historically. You have the other son, which we'll get to in a moment, is the forefather of the Jewish people, and Ishmael is the forefather of the Arab people, and the two generally don't mix very well, as we can kind of see nowadays. So that effort to fix things created a whole new, dynamic that's now millennia later still wrestling with. All right, in fact, I'll pick up from there. The latter half of verse 4, when she realized that she was pregnant, now we're talking about Hagar, when she realized she was pregnant, she looked down on her mistress, Sarah. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You are responsible for my suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and ever since she saw that she was pregnant, she has looked down on me. May the Lord judge between me and you." Abram replied to Sarai, "Here, your slave is in your hands. Do whatever you want with her." Then Sarai mistreated her so much that she ran away from her. So a sad story, basically. She runs away, and Hagar meets God, and God encourages her and preserves her and the boy. Any event, so now let's fast forward to chapter 17. You should be right there. Can I get a different reader, verses 1 through 6 of chapter 17? Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless, that I may make my covenant between me and you and may multiply you greatly." Then Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, "Behold, my covenant is with you, and you shall be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make you into nations, and kings shall come from you."
Wonderful. Thank you. And if maybe someone at that table or thereabouts, can you pick up and read verses, same chapter, verses 15 through 22 of chapter 17? Yes. Thank you, sir.
Stand by, let me find 15, okay.
No problem.
God also said to Abraham, "As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90?
All right, so that's the 10-year separation I was trying to find earlier. Go ahead, sir.
And Abram said to God, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessings." Then God said, "Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarai will bear to you by this time next year." When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him.
All right, thank you, sir. So this is the first passage where the directive clearly links Sarah to this promised son. And I think that's important to note, because God does make a promise. I suggest that he did it. It's kind of, I'm treading on waters here. I don't want to disparage, but I think there was a little bit of vagueness on purpose initially to sort of test their faith to see how they would handle this directive that Abram's going to have a son, and it didn't happen right away. Are they going to trust me? Are they going to wait? Or are they going to try to figure out plan B and implement plan B? And they figured out plan B and implemented plan B. So God shows up sometime later and says, "Hey, Abraham, I promised you a son, and I will give you that son. Furthermore, Sarah is going to be his mom, not Hagar." And Abram pleads for Ishmael because Ishmael's, his offspring, and he wants Ishmael, to have some level of God's favor, and God says as much, but makes very plain now multiple times in the passage that was just read that Sarah is the mom of this promised son. Back to our math. Again, you all can stay where you are, but I find it interesting that we have a time span of about 13 years. The very end of chapter 16, Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. Then the next verse, when Abram is 99, God shows up and says all these things, including Sarah's going to be the mom. So simple math, you have 13 years of separation between when plan B, let's use Hagar as a surrogate and give birth to Ishmael, to God showing up apparently the next time that this message is raised, at least that's what we're told, is 13 years later when God reminds Abram of this promise and clarifies that that the mom of the promised son is Sarah. To me, that begs the question, why would God wait 13 years to come and add that bit of clarification and encouragement? There's not a right answer. I'm just kind of putting that out there. I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on the reason for that time span.
God wanted it to be like a miracle, something that Abraham couldn't control himself. Show that God did it.
Perfect. So yeah, clearly the more age there is, the more unlikely they just got lucky and were able to conceive because, biology was working. More likely it's the hand of God doing this. Great point. Other thoughts? Again, there's not a right answer. I can't point to verses. So here's the reason. I'm just curious. I find it curious. Took them 13 years to plan the bar mitzvah. Okay. I don't think that's the reason, Rhonda, but maybe it is. 13, yeah, right. The firstborn is 13 when this message comes. I shouldn't have dismissed that. Maybe there is some correlation between the two. Sir?
Maybe God really doesn't think in terms of years as we do. 13 to him may be seconds.
Yeah, right. We do see that elsewhere. Good point. God, theologians have tried to describe God as it relates to time and as being God as above time. God is not within the time continuum. He doesn't have the time constraints that we do, and perhaps as a result, he doesn't perceive 13 years, having gone by. I don't know. It's a long time. I think whatever God's reason, I think clearly the fact that he shows up 13 years later and gives this clarification is significant. I think it does create more of a faith opportunity for Abraham, now being renamed Abraham, and his now renamed wife Sarah, to continue to act in faith now that they're even farther beyond age-bearing year, or childbearing age. Sir.
To follow Ms. Midge.
Yes, who you met in the hallway back to the first room.
Going back to Genesis 12, and I don't like to, it's hard for me to play guessing games and assuming what might happen.
Sure.
I don't see any doubt or reservation or from Abram or Sarah in that God tells him what to do and he goes. But here, he's thinking to himself now. So it's a new test of faith. We see Sarah gets tested a little bit later as well. So, it's like exactly what she said. It's coming from God. There's no stopping it, and there's no other way you can say this happened.
Yes.
Except for God.
Yes.
He does that in our lives too.
Indeed. And often sets the stage for that to be the effect. Yes, a great point. Sir?
And it also does prove who is barren and who is not. It puts the emphasis on Sarah's condition, which means that God has got to do something, as opposed to, well, maybe it works today and maybe it won't work tomorrow. I mean, it's from a clinical standpoint.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I mean, Abram was able to conceive with Hagar, so it would appear that maybe Sarah was the one that kept conception from happening initially, and now it got 13 years later, maybe both, Sir?
Maybe 13 years was to let Ishmael grow up so that Abraham didn't have two children. There was one child.
Okay. Yeah, which kind of goes to the bar mitzvah thing. Maybe Ishmael's old enough that he's not needing, okay. Yeah, again, we don't know, but we do know it's 13 years. And I think the 13 years is significant. I think the 13 years makes this a more dramatic story than the next year. God says, hey, it wasn't supposed to be Hagar, it was supposed to be Sarah. Get it straight. He waits 13 years, and lots of things happen in 13 years. So then we get to, was there another hand that I see? I thought so. Yes, ma'am.
I just think it's interesting. Something he said triggered my mind about the fact that this is similar to when Adam listened to Eve about the apple, because it was Sarah who brought it up and said, hey, like she's the one that was doubting and got him to kind of take his eyes off of what God said. And I think that makes it even more significant when we later read that she's in the Hall of Faith, because she's, she has that strong faith, and somewhere along the line that changes, and because when you said it, it says, when she's, I can't find it now, but she's the one that says, hey, here's my acre.
Yeah,
I'm not even
right.
going to do it, and so.
And then gets mad.
Up to that point, he was still having faith, but she caused him to have doubt.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think you're perceptive. Part of what we're trying to lay out, and as this particular docent and the rest of us that have been trained at this facility, when we get to this room, we're trying to lay out that maybe she wasn't so stellar in her faith, at least in the early goings, and yet she's here. And why is she here? And we're going to kind of land on some of those thoughts that you already raised, which was great. So thank you for doing that. I'm not painting, I'm not trying to disparage Sarah by any sense, but the historical account seems to me to show a mixed bag. She seems supportive and is faithful and is ready to go, but now they're in Egypt and she's willing to become his sister instead of his wife, and probably that means that she's now becoming intimate with the Egyptian ruler, and then 20-ish years later, same kind of opportunity. She's willing to become his sister. Now she becomes intimate with somebody else. And then we get here, and she hasn't had a child yet. She offers Hagar, and then Hagar becomes pregnant, and then Sarah's mad at Abram because he got Hagar pregnant, even though she offered Hagar to him. I mean, so there's things that kind of make Sarah not look so great right now. And I'm trying to portray that. We're trying to portray it in this room because she's still here. We still have this statue of her, this stunningly beautiful 90-year-old pregnant lady, and she's in the Hall of Faith, and she's supposed to be here despite some of these early misgivings, some of these early missteps. I think one of the things that we hope you, as you leave this room in 20 minutes when I give you your break and whatever else, is you can walk out of here feeling like Sarah's an example of somebody whose faith pleased God even though it wasn't always that way. Maybe even though it didn't start that way, or it started strong and it got weak and she became vulnerable and made poor choices, but then ended strong, and God looked at the whole picture and said, that's a faith that I want to commend. And I want to put her in a museum like this. Maybe give some of us hope when we have floundered along the way, either started poorly or started well and took a wayward path and had to get redirected to where God wants us. Sarah perhaps is an example of that. Let's finish the story of Sarah. So, please.
I was just thinking, but God is God. He thought maybe thousands of years ago that a person like Blaine would be up here telling something sensational that he created. That it's something that we can all, because when we talk about miracles, we talk about Lazarus. Why did Jesus not raise Lazarus till 3 days? He wanted to make it known that it was such a big miracle. If he raised him like he did the centurion, no one would have noticed. So God made it so that Blaine's sitting here thousands of years later telling other people about such a great miracle.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, God's a great storyteller. He sets in motion things that if we pay attention and we read them and catch some of the details, we can really marvel at how God has worked through people that maybe on surface don't seem so impressive, but turns out they're quite impressive. So the rest of the story, for the sake of time, I'll speed this up. So chapter 18 is a passage I think you guys hopefully will be generally remembering. Abram he's living in a tent, and he gets these 3 visitors, and he asks Sarah to kind of fix a meal for these guys, and in the midst of that chat, the guys say, your wife is going to be with child and going to have a son by this time next year. Recall what Sarah did when she overheard that? She laughed. And we just read earlier, Abram had the same kind of reaction. When God told Abram, you're going to have a son, he laughed. So Sarah laughs as well. And they overhear her laughing and challenge her, and she tries to deny it, but it's undeniable. Excuse me. So anyhow, she is told that she's going to be the mom, and she does, in fact, become the mom. Let's go to chapter 21. So that's a little story leading up to the culmination of this faith experience for Sarah. Chapter 21, can I get a reader to cover verses 1 through 7 of Genesis chapter 21? Thank you, Chris.
The Lord visited Sarah as he had said. And the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age.
Perfect, thank you. So again, this passage tells us Abraham was 100. When Abraham laughed and was talking with God, can I bear a son at 100? Can Sarah at 90? So we know Sarah's 90, nonagenarian. So she's a 90-year-old mom now nursing an infant. Shocking. So we can leave Genesis. Let's go back to Hebrews 11, verse 1. I want to revisit the commendation that's spoken of in Hebrews 11 and just kind of chew on that for a few more minutes before I let you roam the baby shower room here as I take my next break. So Hebrews 11, verse 11. Again, I'll read it again from the dialect I have, which is the Christian Standard. By faith, even Sarah herself, when she was barren, received power to conceive offspring, even though she was past the age, since she considered that the one who had promised was faithful. All right, so this, as I read this verse, by faith, Sarah received power. If you kind of chop out some of the parentheticals in the middle, By faith, Sarah received power to conceive offspring. What is it about her faith that would have allowed her to receive the power to conceive? That's specifically what the author of Hebrews 11 is connecting, her faith to her receiving the power to conceive. We just walked through some of the story of Sarah. Didn't seem like she was showing a whole lot of faith, at least as it relates to the conception part. Anybody have any thoughts on that issue? Because again, that's the specific commendation we see in Hebrews 11. It was her faith that enabled her to receive this power to conceive.
It seems a bit kind of backwards. I don't mean to,
I'm asking the question because it seems that way to me too.
but it's almost like her faith wasn't, should we say, solidified to the point of laughter until after it happened. But every day thereafter that she looks upon Isaac's face, I mean, come on, really? You gotta laugh. You gotta laugh for the remainder of your days. That there should be no way you would ever discount what the Lord said from that day on. But you're right, it does appear by this scripture verse in Hebrews in the Hall of Faith that the faith is established on Sarah before. And yet when we read the account, it seems as though it was kind of strengthened in the end, not in the beginning.
Yeah, and I agree with that, Chris, and you even touched on it a little deeper than I had thought. But to me, it's a little bit confounding, and I thought it may be confounding to you all. It seems like, this episode to me, I think, clearly shows God's faith and his trustworthiness. If he says a promise, even if it might take 26 years or 13 years after the second iteration of it is coming true, but God's not being commended in this room. Sarah is, specifically Sarah's faith is. So I just figured let's camp out. I saw a couple hands over here. Yes, Lee.
I think God wanted to point out to us that faith by us is what he wants to demonstrate as very important to him, our faith in him. And as a result of that, I'm going to bless this lady with something that's impossible because I, as God, can do it, and I did it. So it's not necessarily a reward.
Correct.
But it's a emphasis. Your faith in me will yield the impossible.
Thank you. Great point. Did you have something else to add?
When we were in 21-1, I think that's probably a very pivotal moment when the Lord visited Sarah, as he said he would. And the Lord did unto Sarah as he said he would. So Sarah had her encounter with the living God. And I think that's when her belief and her changing of her mind believed God
Yeah.
that he could do it.
Yeah.
And he did.
Good. Clearly. Other thoughts on this issue? Again, she is commended for her faith. We saw strong faith. We saw, I would suggest, times where she didn't seem to have some strong faith. At the end, she's praising the Lord, and obviously we know that Isaac, is very significant in the history of mankind and is indeed the forefather of, peoples as numerous as the stars in the sky and sand on the seashore. And Mom was critical in all of that, and she deserves to be here, even though the account, if we read it, maybe muddies that water a bit. God, as he looks down on Abraham and Sarah, finds both commendable, independently commendable. We have a whole room in this hall of faith for Sarah, not just as the tag along for Abraham, but for Sarah in regards to her own faith, her own ability, and how her faith necessarily enabled her to receive God's power. That verse seems to suggest that God may have withheld or further delayed the power to conceive until he saw the faith he needed to see in Sarah, and when he saw it, he came. That might have been the timing of his visit. He saw the faith in her and said, okay, now is the time. Maybe that's why it took 13. We don't know exactly, but this verse does connect Sarah's faith to the power she got to conceive. So I believe there is a correlation between the two. It's hard to connect those dots. It's hard to know exactly God's mindset, but this commendation clearly shows that there is a connection and that God favored Sarah and blessed her in this manner in a way that could only be described as God's doing, because these people have no business having kids at their age, but for God. And he did it because of her faith. And this room is here, the baby shower room is here for you to enjoy and kind of reflect on the faith of Sarah and maybe take some comfort that while we might not be stunning and we might not be able to conceive or do quite this unbelievable thing, at an age that would seem impossible, we still have the opportunity to have commendable faith, faith that pleases God, even if we haven't started so well, even if at the moment we're still stumbling along. There is still hope for us. There is still plenty of opportunity to please God with our acts of faith. Let me close this out in prayer, and I'll let you roam this room. God, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for this room. We thank you for Sarah's example. We thank you for giving us details of her life, and some of those details seem to muddy the water as to her commendable faith. And I suspect you gave us those details so we could see perhaps a muddied story and yet find in the midst of it a faith that you saw and were pleased by and commended in this room. So may we take the lessons that we can take from them. May we find ourselves willing to do the unbelievable and rely on the unbelievable, as this room's secondary theme is, as did Sarah. Allow you to work through us in ways that can only be explained as you're doing and not ours. May our opportunities to please you with faith continue, and may we be courageous to do just that. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you.